This Georgia Department of Education screencast is intended to provide teachers of 5th grade social studies with content knowledge to aid in the teaching of the Georgia Standards of Excellence. The technological advancements of the last century and their significance to America and the world simply cannot be overstated. In the 25 years following the devastation of World War II, two significant developments dramatically shifted our view of our little blue planet. Both television and space exploration made our world seem much smaller and increased our sense that we are all in this together, while at the same time also deepened some of our divisions. The advent of the Internet and the personal computer in the last quarter of the century has only magnified our Alice in Wonderland view of our global village, at times inconceivably large, while at other times seemingly a microcosm. Certainly volumes have been written about the paradoxical impact of television on our society, but for brevity's sake we will limit our discussion to those associated with historical events for the most part. Before the Civil Rights Movement, television both formed our perceptions on race and gender while at the same time reflecting them as they were. The white male view of the world was reflected and magnified by television programming created by white males for what they assumed was a white audience. This programming then tended to reinforce that this was the norm, therefore validating it as such. And yet television was to a great extent the catalyst for shattering that very fallacy. Certainly no one could deny that television coverage of the events of the Civil Rights Movement was instrumental in bringing pressure to bear on politicians to pass the Civil Rights and Voting Acts. As American society's view on race began to change, so did its depiction in television. Programming began to include African American or black actors in non-stereotypical roles, and over time, programming was developed specifically for African American or black viewers, which in turn helped normalize the idea of a desegregated world. As with race relations, television both served to widen the divide while ironically bridging the gap when it came to the Cold War and our relations with the Soviet Union. Programming again both reflected America's views on communism while simultaneously exaggerating and validating them by vilifying Russian characters, and yet news coverage often made us sympathetic to the plight of the Russian citizen. It increased our ability to experience what cultures very different from our own were like, bringing about the idea of a global village. Broadcasts of worldwide events such as the Olympics both celebrated our rivalries with other countries, while serving to humanize them as well. Amidst the medal counting and chest pounding, we found ourselves awed by a flawless performance by a tiny 14-year-old Romanian gymnast by the name of Nadia Comaneci. We rooted for the highly unlikely Jamaican bobsled team, and were brought to tears by the story of Viktor Petrenko, a Russian figure skater who helped American pair skater Katie Wood by bringing her his own personal stash of hospital supplies after her horrendous fall from a lift during her routine. Television not only showed us this Russian skater's compassionate heart, but gave us a first-hand look at the deplorable conditions Russian citizens were living in. You see, Petrenko knew the horrid lack of sterile modern supplies the pair's team would encounter in a Russian hospital, and so he brought his very own valuable stockpile for the doctors to use in treating Wood. Through the power of television, millions of people around the world got their first glimpse of our planet from space. Many could not help but feel both a collective sense of pride and an incredible sense of vulnerability. The sight of that little blue marble, well, black and white, hanging in the vast blackness of space made us, at least for one very brief moment, feel connected to each other in our isolation as a planet. And that brings us to space exploration. Our biggest push towards advancements in the area of space exploration were a direct result of our Cold War competitiveness and antagonism with the Soviet Union, and yet it ironically led to the creation of the International Space Station, in which the U.S. and Russia are wholly dependent on each other. During the Cold War years, the Soviet Union became the antithesis of everything Americans valued and were perceived as a significant threat to our national security. And so when the Russians launched Sputnik into space by way of an intercontinental ballistic missile, Americans were deeply concerned, and rightfully so. With the launch of that missile, the Soviets had just proven that they could reach any part of our country with a nuclear weapon without having to step foot outside their own backyard, so to speak. And the Sputnik satellite spawned fears that America had fallen way behind in terms of technological advancements. In response, the U.S. government quickly began pouring time, energy, and resources into our own space program, vowing to not only catch up to the Soviets, but to surpass them by being the first to put a man on the moon. The Soviets countered by pouring even more resources into their own space program, and by extension, their weapons capabilities, resulting in an ever-escalating space race and adding fuel to the nuclear arms race. It was this very response that the Reagan administration later used against the Soviets to bring about the collapse of their communistic economy and the very Union itself. The upshot of all of this was that our knowledge of space travel increased tenfold, and on a more practical level, our ability to use satellites opened up a whole new realm of technological advancements we take for granted today. And so we come to the invention of the computer, whose invention in historical context is still so very recent that it is unlikely we are even aware of what its full impact on American society will eventually be. Certainly, the changes, for better or worse, are already significant and far-reaching. Even at this early stage, however, the computer, in combination with the Internet, has touched virtually every aspect of our lives: how we work, how we shop, how we practice medicine, and how we get our information. For better or worse, it has radically altered how information is disseminated, to the point that the age of the computer is also being hailed as the information age. The delay between when an event happens and when the world knows about it is non-existent, and the reporters of these events are no longer restricted to news media professionals. Everyone with a smartphone is a reporter, and the eyes of the world are everywhere, literally in the hands of nearly every person. And once again we find ourselves with the paradox of the computer and Internet giving us a veritable torrent of information from so many diverse lenses, and yet with the click of a button we can narrow our world to thousands who think just like us, and thereby validating and justifying our own narrow view of the world if we choose to do so. This same powerful ability to censor what reaches us extends to governments as well. The Iron Curtain of yesteryear has become an electronic curtain for many governments, selectively allowing only approved information to be disseminated within their borders. And yet, with the flood that is out there, some images and stories still seep through. To its credit, the computer has ushered in a host of other technological and medical advancements, given the fact that the best minds across the globe can collaborate instantly with each other on projects that better the lives of everyone. And the global economy generated by the Internet has both strengthened the world economy and increased our interreliance on each other. With a few keystrokes you can purchase just about anything from anywhere in the world and have it the next day in most cases. Computer technology in America alone has resulted in a shift from a product-based economy to a service-based economy, significantly changing the employment and educational landscape of our nation, and that of many others as well. Computers in the workplace have displaced many people from certain jobs, especially manufacturing, while opening up entirely new opportunities in other areas, especially information technology. And again, for better or worse, the need for a more highly educated workforce has been a consequence of this shift, and some would argue increasing the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Many have lamented that the computer and its myriad other associated devices will be the downfall of society as we become increasingly isolated in our private technological worlds, while others see it as greatly expanding our social contacts beyond the limitations of physical and language barriers, increasing our exposure to distant regions and cultures. While all of this ability to connect instantaneously with our fellow man has helped to raise our collective consciousness in many ways, the speed with which this technology is advancing has left us with a quandary for how, or even if we should, regulate it to protect people. With the economic prosperity we derive from the Internet commerce comes new opportunities for criminals and frauds to prey upon society. How do we protect privacy when everyone has the ability to record us without our knowledge or permission? Where do we draw the lines? How do we legislate the ever-shifting morals and mores of an increasingly connected global society? How much and when should governments intervene in the affairs of the people? These are just a few of the many issues the citizens of the information age are only just beginning to grapple with. But we do not yet have to grapple with them here, as we are out of time. Once again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Here are some links to some helpful resources, as well as those used in the creation of this screencast.